Here we are. We are at RSAC Conference.
Sean, we're living the dream.
We are living the dream this week, right? So I don't know, 40,000+ of our closest friends cruising the streets and roaming the halls, and hopefully having some good conversations.
Absolutely, so far at least.
So far, yes. So Brian Dye, it's a pleasure to have you on. Excited to hear about what you're up to with Corelight. Before we get into the solution and the challenges that you're helping organizations overcome, maybe a few words about some of the things you've done that led you to Corelight and what your current role at Corelight is.
No, thanks for the opportunity. Really appreciate the time. You know, the quick background on me, I've been in the cyberspace for about 15 years now, and kind of typically at some of the larger vendors. I was at Symantec for many years, at McAfee for a couple of years, helping get them spun out of Intel. And then, you know, when I decided to go into the smaller side of the world, I looked at just a range of security startups near my house, and was really enthralled by the open source nature of the company, the culture of the company, the mission fit, the type of customers that we had a chance to serve, and that's what really drew me in. So I've been at Corelight for about 7 years. I led products for the first couple, and then been CEO for roughly the last 4.5. So
nice one. So let's talk about. So you touched on the open source. So I want to get to that, but maybe a brief overview of Corelight and then its connection to the open source, because I think it's a big part of what's going on, right?
Yeah, I think the really simple version on Corelight is we give you ground truth of what's happening on the network to find the attacks that are bypassing your EDR, bypassing your traditional perimeter defenses like firewalls. And there's no better example for this out in the market today than Volt and Salt Typhoon. So if you think about all the guidance from CISA, it's starting with, yes, you need to patch your systems, yes, you need to train your team, but then it makes a really big point of saying you really need to do network baselining and anomaly detection. And if you think about the network detection response category and what Corelight does specifically, that's what we do, right? We give you that ground truth visibility so you can understand the things that have bypassed all your other defenses.
Right. So there's been a lot of focus on the EDR and XDR space, and I feel that maybe not so much attention on the network these days, which seems really strange to me. I grew up doing all the IPS stuff, network IPS and whatever. And so how does that shifted in terms of teams and technology and infrastructure? Clearly cloud has come into play. But so how does network monitoring and protection, how's that changed, and how's Corelight kind of either led some of that and helped to be ahead of it?
Yeah, what you're seeing is exactly right. There's a natural pendulum in cyber that's been swinging for 25 years. Evolution on the endpoint, evolution on the network, back to evolution on the endpoint, and so forth. So the focus on EDR over the last 5 or 10 years has been wonderful, positive, incredibly effective for customers, and is an awesome thing, right? So if there's anyone watching this who does not have a modern EDR deployed, please stop watching this and go do that. Like we'll talk afterwards, right? But then what happens is the attackers look at what is the weak spot that is left over from that architectural evolution. And so if you look at what's happening now, you know, there is an 8x increase year over year last year in the actual exploits and perimeter devices being the entry point into networks, because folks are avoiding EDR controls, right? Once folks steal credentials, about half of the credential theft is on either personally owned or non-EDR devices. So the attackers are doing exactly what you'd expect them to do. They are avoiding the perimeter controls. And so our angle on that's pretty simple. We've had the benefit, as part of this open source heritage that we come from serving some of the most elite defensive teams in the world, right? The web scale tech giants, intel agencies, things like that. And so the threat model they've been wrestling with for the past 5 or 10 years is the one that we've developed to serve. And so, as this network defense becomes so important on inside the perimeter of your environment, things like NetFlow and PCAP just aren't enough anymore, right? You need deep enriched metadata, you need behavioral baselining, you need machine learning, you need all the advanced analytics that those technologies just couldn't provide. Right. So it really is that pendulum swinging back to kind of innovation in a way that you're helping counter the specific kind of EDR and firewall evasion techniques that are being used today.
So talk to me about how the teams have changed too, and maybe their processes, and maybe even how the leadership team looks at risk with respect to network visibility and monitoring and response and all that stuff.
No, it's a great question, because the team structures we don't see changing, right?
So you have
those
IT,
roles are very,
you have Endpoint,
IT, InfoSec, and if you look within the SOC, especially in some of the larger security teams, you've got, you know, a security engineering versus an operations teams. If you're really lucky, you've got some malware reverse analysis or detection engineering. All the org structures are very consistent. What's happening is two things. Number one, that visibility metric, folks are realizing that itself is a vulnerability. right? If you've been relying on PCAP as your way to solve this problem, and you have PCAP for 7 days, and you're investigating a threat from 8 days ago, you're blind. You have no visibility, you have no recourse, and you can't analyze your way out of I don't have the data, right? So that becomes a force multiplier for everything. So that's one really big thing. That leads to a lot of technology modernization, right? Folks that might have been relying on NetFlow or PCAP or a standalone IDS that were a great idea 10 years ago, not the modern way today, that's really big. And the second piece, because we can only let it go a certain number of minutes before we talked about AI, that's the thing for RSA this year, is that they're realizing if they want to accelerate their SOC, the context that the network provides is actually incredibly important to connect the dots across everything else. Because the endpoint gives you depth, the human identity gives you human context, the network gives you attack breadth context. So the fact that the network lets you connect the dots across everything means that all of a sudden these AI initiatives also ironically make your network visibility more important because we're that connective tissue that helps connect the dots.
So when we talk about visibility, what are some of the signals? You talked about PCAP and NetFlow. Gives you some signals. They're not enough. So what else do organizations and teams need to look for in terms of signs that something might be going awry?
Yeah, there's really 3 layers, right? And all of them are important. The baseline layer is just what's happening on the network. Give me the cliff notes. So one of the things that the open source project that we're based on, now Zeek, formerly Bro, was originally about was to say, hey, look, give me the cliff notes. Give me the 1% signal so I don't have to keep 100% of the network traffic. So that just gives you ground truth. And then we've invested quite a bit on top of that to create other indicators of behavior. So for example, analyzing encrypted traffic. If you see keystrokes happening over SSH, and that's not a network admin during a change window, you're at least looking at a policy violation, and you could be looking at someone typing, keyboard commands over a command and control link. So that baseline foundational data is super important. Flipping to the other end of the pyramid, yes, raw detections matter. So whether it's behavioral rules or signatures or machine learning, there's a whole bunch of just fine badness that of course is important. But the real thing that this category is adding, that Corelight's creating, is network baselining and anomaly detection. Because there's a whole bunch of, this is weird. It's new and unusual, right? That's a problem. You don't necessarily start your incident response process with that, but you are going to use it for threat hunting, and you are going to use it for that context to be able to connect the dots across the rest of an attack. So really, providing all 3 of those layers is foundationally kind of what we're giving security teams as ammunition.
Okay, so that anomaly, new, might be legitimate. New and weird, maybe less legitimate, but I'm wondering what's changed in that layer that teams might not be thinking about? Because the first thing I'm thinking is agentic AI, right? And non-human based actions, or machines are taking action on our behalf, and maybe those things are compromised, or microservices are compromised. So what are you seeing in that anomaly layer where humans and non-humans might look different now?
Yeah, the advance here is actually in the math. Because if you look at how anomaly detection was done, even a few years ago, folks had a really hard time getting baselining that would separate the new versus the unusual. So if all you do is generate new, you're creating a ton of noise that doesn't help anybody, right? That's a diff. That should be a diff command. Like that's not actually helpful. The clustering analysis to be able to find new and unusual is actually really what's impacting here. Because if you look at what were folks complaining about network analytics on 10 years ago, it was the fire hose of alerts that was too much for people to process.
You tap in, now what?
Exactly, right? Like, oh thanks, I'm drowning in alerts and you gave me 10,000 more alerts. Like that is not helpful. So really being able to provide folks constructive constructive context is actually what's been really different. And it's really been evolutions in the math and the application of the math. And for us, one of the things that we've really thought a lot about is we co-develop a bunch of our detection models in a pretty wide range of customer environments, because networks are not endpoints, right? Endpoints look highly similar, and you've got tools like VirusTotal that give you great kind of corpuses of malware to go test against. Everybody's network looks different. So you really have to be developing your material, developing your technology in a wide variety of super diverse networks so that you can actually understand and you're not tailored for any one type. Because the moment you do that, you're going to fail in another one, you're going to cause a bunch of noise that just doesn't help anybody.
So I presume you help teams kind of figure out the definition of good, the definition of anomalies, and then hopefully helping them to actually build a network that is secure, that they are more less exposed perhaps, so maybe change the way the network functions. But then also, I guess what I'm really leading toward is, so you help the teams actually get stuff running, but then how do they measure success, and how do they communicate to their management team that we're actually doing what we need to do with respect to the network?
Yeah, the three most interesting metrics I've seen customers use. Number one, you already covered, which is that visibility metric.
Okay.
Because for folks that aren't tracking that, they realize they have to, and they need to put both coverage and time. Because that tells you what your actual visibility is, and that becomes just a force multiplier for all of your other metrics, right? If you think you have a mean time to detection metric, but you have 80% visibility, you're kidding yourself. You don't know 20% of that metric, right? So that's number one. The second piece we've seen folks going after is their MITRE coverage, and in particular lateral movement. Okay. Because lateral movement's one of those classic areas of the kill chain to look at where you're before damage, but you have a lot of chances to find the attacker. By definition, they are moving more often, right? They're beaconing, they're moving, they're living off the land. You get more bites at the apple to go find them. So lateral movement coverage in particular has been really big. And then the most interesting one I've really enjoyed hearing customers talk about is looking at the percentage of cases they can't close. Because that tells you your ultimate success metric, right? If you've got 5% of cases you can't close, like, okay, you get this alert, you're investigating it, you don't know what it is, and you eventually just run out of data and you have to give up as an analyst. Okay. This is like the embarrassment metric, right? And the savvy orgs are starting to track that because it tells them what their uncertainty is, right? I met with a customer years ago that had a really interesting waterfall for me. He said, look, we block 30 billion attacks at the perimeter. And then we have 30,000 incidents that someone has to chase down, and I have 3,000 security events where I have to go do something. He said, that's not what I'm worried about. What I'm worried about is whether that 3,000 number should be 3,500. So that's what people are trying to get their arms around, right? What am I missing at the end of the day?
Right.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing that. So, as we wrap here, maybe give me some examples. That was a good example of a particular incident, but can you share, you don't have to name the customer, but some use cases where they didn't have visibility, now they do, they found some things that, I don't know, indicators of compromise or whatever, and then how do they refine and improve their program after working with you to cover
to bring it together? Yeah. My favorite one, because it's just so easy to understand afterwards, but very few people think of it up front, is a ransomware attack. So we had a customer that was under a ransomware attack, I'll just say relatively recently, and the attacker got in, standard playbook, said, hey, we've stolen all this stuff, if you don't give it to us, there's a $10 million ransom, here's what we're going to publish, here's how it's going to affect your brand, how it's going to affect your stock price. And that customer, because we had been working with them for about 1.5 years prior, they had really built up a baseline understanding of their network. And the first thing they realized was, there is no honor among thieves. Right? The attacker claimed to have stolen all this stuff, and they had actually taken about 10% of it. And the 10% they took actually wasn't that brand damaging. And so they wound up actually turning down the ransom. And so the difference between I think and I know, you can actually put a price tag on it, it's $10 million. And if you can imagine, it's not just the defensive team and the IR team that were getting their arms around this, you have to convince the CISO and the management structure, even the exec suite, and actually the board audit committee. So again, I think versus I know is a tremendously powerful position to be in from a defender standpoint. And I think there's no better case for this than being able to look at truly the all-in exposure from a ransomware attack when you find all these kind of attacker dynamics through in the middle of it.
So that information, the context surrounding it is, lack of a better word, automatic through Corelight?
Yes, because we give you the way to look back in time to understand what happened. And again, let's go back to the Volt and Salt Typhoon discussion we started with. The reason that these folks are getting in is they are using edge exploits or unmanaged devices or IoT devices, a whole set of non-defendable points to get in. Once they're in, you don't know they're in by definition. They're using these living off the land techniques. So by the real value that we're providing is the ability to not just find the indicators, the anomalies live when it's happening, but be able to look back in time, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months in the past and say, who got in, what did they do, are they still there, has damage actually been done, and are you sure?
Right.
Can you prove it? Right? That's tremendous. So one of a former Corelighter, unfortunately now passed away, had a great sentence on this, stolen from Asian folklore. He said, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago.
Right.
The second best time is right now, because you want that
There you go.
backtrack of evidence to be able to look and find and have that ground truth.
Yeah. So let's close with that, because if you don't have the visibility, you don't really know that there
And you
might
can't recreate it.
there might be a problem.
Yeah.
So when you're working with new customers, or perhaps having conversations as a prospect to bring them on as a customer, what's the trigger for them to say, because they don't have a sign, right, yet? So how do you give them a sign, or how do they engage with you to recognize the value that we just talked about and decide to bring you on? What's that conversation sound like?
The conversation usually has a couple of different starting points. One is they've looked at their current technology stack and they've realized they are using the tech stack that was best in class 10 years ago. Because they've been focused on endpoint, because they've been focused on identity, they haven't been looking at the network, and they realize this is just untapped, right? So they're seeing it PCAP, IDS, and NetFlow, and they say, I can do better. That's a big one, technology consolidation. Second one that's related to that is they're looking at the cost efficacy of that stack and saying, gee, maybe I don't need to keep 30 days of PCAP, right, when 80% of it's encrypted. Maybe that's not a good use of my security budget, right? That tends to be a big one. And then the third one tends to be when they're looking at their MITRE coverage and they're looking at C2 lateral movement in particular and saying, hey, where am I exposed here? And that could be through a proactive assessment, that could be through red teaming, or frankly, they could have just read any one of the last 10 CIS advisories that are all telling them the same thing, right? This is the big uncovered area for most organizations. Isn't that true for you? So it tends to be one of those three that kind of starts it makes it a priority for them, and then that starts our conversation.
Got it. And I always have one more question. Marco's not here to stop me, so
There
I'm
you
going to
go.
ask one more question. Because I think for me, if I was responsible for the network that runs the business, I wouldn't want to change it too much.
Yes.
So how do you help teams recognize, well, you really do in these instances, or you don't have to, but here's how you kind of alternatively mitigate some of this risk?
Yeah, that's one of the great things about us is that we are an out-of-line device, right? We are going to take a tap, a span, a packet broker in the clouds, a VPC traffic mirror, and kind of their equivalents. So we are non-disruptive to the network. So we don't force a network re-architecture. You don't have to roll out a big microsegmentation project. You don't have to, change your trunking strategy or anything like that. The network operations team would go crazy. The change hurdles alone make that a 2-year project, exactly like you already know. And so the ability to show up and say, hey, here's a way to materially upgrade your defensive capabilities, address the Volt Typhoon, Salt Typhoon, living off the land, lateral movement type attacks, and not disrupt your network operations. And oh, by the way, what do we see? Folks bring us in to the SOC for incident response and threat hunting, 100% of the time.
Yeah.
In the first 6 to 9 months, if you're giving folks ground truth of what happens on the network, you're giving people fantastic data. What's the use case for fantastic data?
Better decisions.
All of it.
Yeah.
So we start getting used for network ops, compliance, insider threat, fraud, API security, kind of you name it. So that initial tension with the network ops team actually turns into synergy afterwards, because they're like, oh wait, we've had this problem we haven't been able to diagnose for the last 3 years, but because we get this great fidelity, now we can sort it out, right? That tends to be the bonus on the conversation.
That's fantastic. Well, Brian, it's great chatting with you.
Really enjoyed it. Thanks for making time for us.
Fun conversation, and excited to see how you guys continue to grow, and it's all about the network again. Let's circle.
What's old is new.
Let's circle the wagons. Network visibility. You need to know what's going on, not just for security, but for the health of the business. It
Really, it is.
So, Brian, thanks a million, man.
Thanks for the time, Sean. Enjoyed it.
This is a special announcement. We are heading to RSAC Conference in San Francisco for our 11th years of coverage, April 28, May 1st.
And as always, we're bringing you keynotes, conversations with organizers, speakers, industry leaders, plus the latest insights from the world of cybersecurity.
And we'll reconnect with old friends, meet new ones, and of course, we want you and your company to join us.
We have a few spots left for full sponsorship and our on-location briefings. You can book yours now at itspmagazine.com/RSAC.
We're going.
And you're coming with us.